Hello, everyone who is joining us this afternoon, morning, or evening, wherever you may be in the globe. You've reached the Enterprise Sales Forum webinar series. And this is a series that we use to bolster what we do generally, which is bring B2B sales professionals together on a monthly basis to meet each other, share ideas, to network, and to learn from some really great practitioners out there in the field of sales so that we can all become a lot more nuanced and a lot more skilled in this thing that we call sales, and particularly in B2B sales. And today we are really delighted to have two incredible speakers to join us, and again, to bolster what we do live, but also to bring some great folks together so we can have chats online and through webinars such as this. And today we want to talk about this idea of predictive sales. What really does it mean? What does it mean to actually implement and embrace this idea of predictive sales in your organization? Are we just talking about technology? Are we talking about a process? Are we talking about really an entire way of thinking about your sales organization? And we brought together Roy, CEO of Chorus.ai, and we have Stephen Brody, who is the head of account development in Americas at MuleSoft. And I'm going to let Roy lead us off in this discussion, but maybe just like a quick round of introductions to share where you're from, how you got to this point, and then we can jump right into the meat of the matter.
Sure thing. Thanks so much, Mark. So I started Chorus. I've been working on Chorus for about 2 years. We are based in San Francisco with R&D in Tel Aviv. And we're part of this trend of predictive sales, and we apply predictive sales to conversations. And if you think about the last unknown frontier in organizations and in sales, it's what's happening in those 10,000 hours of conversations a quarter that a typical 50-person sales team has. And so we're really focused on using technology to help augment and improve the performance of sales folks when they're doing what they do best, which is connecting and persuading prospects on the phone.
Awesome.
Excellent.
And this is Stephen Brody. I appreciate the kind introduction. I'm certainly not an incredible speaker, especially after staying up really late to watch the end of Game 7. But just to give a little background, MuleSoft is a company based in San Francisco. We are helping companies really connect anything to everything with the goal of helping them really create an application network. Prior to working at MuleSoft, I worked at a predictive analytics HR startup, and prior to working there, I actually spent 6 years in Army Special Operations working in 2nd Ranger Battalion. So if I have let loose a swear word or two, please, it's a hard habit to unlearn after spending that much time in the military, so I apologize ahead of time.
That's no worries, Stephen. And again, really glad to have you. Yeah, and if you get a little bit out of line, we'll have to go all military on you. But I like to call this the PG-13 webcast. So no worries on the language here. I think we're all pretty much adults, and being in sales, I've been known to drop a few F-bombs here or there. But I guess to lead things off, we probably want to just level set, right? Because predictive sales there's a lot of marketing speak. And since this is not a marketing audience, we really want to talk to what does it really mean from a sales perspective? So Roy, I'd be happy to just have you launch in. If you have some slides that you want to share throughout our talk, please do.
Sure thing. So I'm going to start, if I may, with a little bit of context. And so predictive sales, I mean, this is a field that's evolving in front of us. And so we want to touch on a lot of different parts of it. Ironically, this will not be data-driven, as data-driven as predictive sales is, because we want to share a lot of different points of view out there on what this means to organizations and how they operationalize it. I also wanted to add that it's a complex landscape, and so we'll take a point of view because Mark suggested that having a point of view on it is better than not taking one. But nothing in here is set in stone. And so part of this is, I'm sure that many folks listening to this webinar are involved in actually shaping the future through the products and technologies that they're building. And so, we will be surprised by what we think is going to happen over the next 1 to 5 years and what actually does play out. So we'd love to get other opinions shared over social media, and hopefully we won't insult too many people if we take a different point of view on some things. But so to answer your question, what is predictive sales? At a high level, I think of it as using historical data to help make better decisions or surface insights using technology. And the most important thing to think about is the context. So in what situations does past performance actually stand as a good indicator of future performance? And so, on this slide, I love using Michael Jordan as an example because if you think about his career in basketball, the same rules applied, and you could be pretty sure have a pretty good sense of what Michael's performance would look like. If the context and the rules change, in this example, him going to baseball, all of a sudden past performance may not be a good indicator of future performance. And so that I think is the most important way to think about it. And we're seeing predictive sales influence a lot of different part of sales organizations and the cycle. So for example, it might be on the inbound side where we're using predictive lead scoring to look at all the data that's being captured around how prospects interact with our websites, interact with our content, interact with us on social media, and we're using that to judge where they might be in the buyer's journey to decide when it makes sense to reach out to them and put a warm voice on the other end of the phone to see if they're ready to start a more formal process. On the outbound side, it could be around predictive dialing. So if we have teams that are out there and essentially have an infinite number of choices of who to reach out to, how do we use the technology to remove a decision that an SDR might have to make 100 times a day on who to call next and put that into the hands of an algorithm so that they can be more effective and focus on those conversations themselves. It might be around workflow and cadences. So out of all the different folks that I could follow up with in a touch, what's the right next touch to have based on what's been proven to work for a certain type of customer segment? And last but certainly not least is when you look at all of those deals that are in the pipeline, how do you think about being able to predict where they're, when they're going to close, if they're going to close, based on the information that we have at the time? And so, this is just a high-level overview of all the different places where predictive sales is touching our people and our processes, but that's the way that I think about it.
All right, but so I think we got a good sense of the what, but I think we want to spend the bulk of the time during this talk about how that really plays out. And I think that's going to be really interesting because we have so many points where predictive can have an impact. What does that really mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's two types of ways that predictive sales can impact teams and processes. The first one, and I'll lay this out with a little bit of context, which is a lot of folks may confuse predictive sales with something like AI and replacing jobs, replacing people. It's a really common narrative with companies like Uber and what's happening with self-driving cars and whatnot. In sales, it's very different. It's really about thinking through individual tasks that a sales rep might do and deciding, is this the type of task that could be replaced or a decision that could be replaced by an algorithm, or is it something where the algorithms and the technology can give us a superpower. So you might think of it as Iron Man versus RoboCop. And so, if you look at the Roomba up there, cleaning your floor, it's repetitive. There are going to be no big surprises, right? We know the layout of the room. We know what's going to be happening. And so if you're crunching, in the world of sales, if you're crunching lots of data and you're trying to find your optimal next step, chances are an algorithm is going to be better than the average human. And so we'll see a lot of those tasks moving to the technology. Same thing if it's just a simple repetitive task. We'll see that moving to the technology. On the other hand, and here I have a picture of a robot caring for a baby. There are some things like we will never entrust that to a robot. And so if it's something that is complicated and there's value to having a technology crunch through all the data and help bring certain things to your attention, or just do a lot of the heavy lifting that we simply don't have time to do, but ultimately put that information and those insights in front of a human, I think that's the other big place where we're going to see predictive sales impacting teams and processes.
Right. I think I look at it as the difference between having a bot that just sits there and does the entire soup to nuts as what a salesperson would do. And there are certainly people that, think that or postulate that. Rather, I view it more as it's the AR, enhanced sales rep of the future. And I think you hit it exactly right. It's really about more augmenting what we do already and implementing a very data-oriented approach, a machine learning approach to helping us make better decisions. So I guess to that point, what specifically, have you done, say, in this field? And does Chorus maybe, what you've been building have some sort of impact in that?
Yeah, so I love people and I love technology, and the perspective that we're taking with Chorus is that second one. How can we use technology to do what it's best at? And act as a superpower or a multiplier on the skills of our people. And so at Chorus specifically, and I think I have a slide on here that explains it at a high level, we're focused on conversations. And if you think about a typical 50-person sales team, they're having over 10,000 hours of conversations a quarter. And those conversations are what's supporting revenue. So they're clearly important, but because of how much time is required for anybody to sit in on those calls, right, whether it's a manager or a trainer or a coach, it's extremely difficult for any salesperson to get feedback on what's working, what's not working, to learn from one another, et cetera. And it's very hard for managers to invest the time to help develop the skills of those sales reps. And so it's also hard just for teams to share experiences with one another. So, if Stephen was on a deal against our biggest competitor and had the perfect answer to a specific objection, what are the chances that that can get shared with everybody else on my team who's in a live deal with this competitor? And the answer today is it's impossible to do. Because maybe 5% of a conversation makes its way into a rep's notebook, and 5% of a rep's notes makes its way into the CRM, and nobody has the time to go through a CRM to pull together those insights. And so what we've done at Chorus is we've said, well, these conversations are an asset, and they're a major lever point to improve the performance of a team if you can learn and improve the selling skills, the craft of these reps. So our technology joins each conversation, records it, and then essentially does all the work that you'd want a manager or maybe an intern to do in terms of telling you, here's everything that happened on this conversation. Let's do that work for you. And if you're a manager, we make it extremely easy to see a dashboard of every conversation that took place and everything that you want to know about it, so that you can more effectively help manage your team, help manage your pipeline, and decide where you want to focus your time and energy.
Yeah, and I think what's go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, so, I mean, Roy, you mean not, like, Salesforce aren't putting everything in the CRM? please go ahead, Stephen.
It may surprise you. Yeah, it may surprise you.
Yeah, and
Stephen, I didn't mean to interrupt, but.
Yeah, what I was going to say, and you actually sort of brought up my exact point is, first of all, not everyone is adding everything to a CRM. You're probably getting 5% of what actually happened on a given qualification call, for instance, as information that's being transcribed, and translated back into your CRM. But what's really interesting is what we found as a sales team is that, often those initial qualification calls are one of the biggest, if not the biggest levers we have to pull in order to be successful in driving a successful engagement. Now, I bring up qualification in particular because talking to other leaders, I've heard time and time again that actually being able to have a very objective way to qualify whether or not in a conversation or an initial engagement was a good one is something that is sort of like a as of yet unattained aspirational sort of nirvana state. And what's interesting about that is we're qualifying in a lot of stuff that may or may not be qualified into our pipeline at the right stage with the right sort of level of likelihood of closing. And when we do that, because we're not doing it in a predictive way, we're sort of taking a gut stab at what we put in, well, it sort of leads to that idea of like garbage in, garbage out. And if one was able to accurately predict based on a conversation whether or not something was indeed qualified, then we can make better decisions on how to continue to execute and run a sales play. So I think this is a really interesting sort of final frontier that has yet been unconquered.
Right, and you actually bring up something that, I think we'll dive into a little bit later, but maybe it might make sense to talk about now. I mean, data. I think that's the biggest challenge we have. And Stephen, you bring up like a huge, huge pain point that I've seen, again, across many sales leaders I talk to. It's we optimize all the parts of the sales funnel and all these processes from the lead coming in, stuff that we look at from the more from the closing end of the cycle. But this middle part, these conversations, it's kind of like we're playing darts in the dark in many cases. And oftentimes we just don't have the data that we need to make even a cogent type of decision.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you sit in on QBR, you find sales leaders continuously interrogating whether or not something is indeed qualified or forecasted accurately. And we have a ton of data that we're putting into a CRM, but yet it's still an incomplete picture, and it's not making an accurate prediction a lot of the times as to whether or not something is being forecasted accurately. And that has really, detrimental downstream effects as you're trying to drive a predictable business and drive predictable revenue for your operations.
Yeah, and if I can just add one really maybe a side point to this, the data matters, and Mark, this is something that we've talked about quite a bit in terms of the craft of the salesperson and how much of it is asking the right questions that surface the right information. And so part of it is that, like we had one customer that was extremely interested in competitive insights. So just knowing who they were up against in certain deals. And it turned out that after we had set up Chorus for a few months, we looked at the data to see, how often are these competitors coming up? And the answer was not very often. And it was surprising. What happened, it turned out, was that reps weren't asking the question, right? So if you don't get the team to say, hey, Mark, so who else are you looking at right now as a part of this process? If you don't ask that question, you're not going to get you're not going to surface that information, and that actually has the biggest impact on your ability to forecast.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, you know this well, but one of the biggest pain points that any sales leader faces on a daily basis is we make these massive investments in designing a sales process and bringing aboard all of this great tooling, but process adherence just is something that needs to be constantly monitored. And, you know, salespeople, we're all guilty of not necessarily being the best or most willing at times to want to follow a process. And on top of that, often we haven't validated using data whether or not the process is the right process. And that's what's really interesting about taking this really, really impactful point of leverage in any sales cycle, you know, a meaningful engagement with a prospect or with a customer, and really using that data to go and validate whether or not our current processes are the right ones or whether or not people are adhering to them in the first place.
So, if I kind of take the tenor of the conversation to this point, I look at it from two different streams. One, it's we may not even have the right data, and that's a problem because we're not going to get people to spend that time necessarily to be rigorous enough to put that data into some sort of system to start to make us a little bit more intelligent about what we should be doing. But even more, I guess, of a broad stroke is that even though we have a lot of technology that we can bring to bear, it doesn't seem like it's actually addressing the right pieces that are going to have a larger impact in our sales. And historically, I spent a lot of time at Siebel. We sold a lot of that stuff called CRM, and a lot of folks that definitely were using CRM would, to your point, Stephen, end up in forecast calls or quarterly business reviews, and there'd be these big questions about, well, what's truth and what's not truth, and that was all built up on an entire quarter or half year's worth of just missing data points. So how do we actually want to maybe address some of these things?
Yeah, I think if you look at the slide that I threw up there, the quality of the data matters, and it's going to matter in a way, like over the next 5 years, it's going to matter in a way that's completely different than it did over the previous 5 years. And the reason for it is that data will become a competitive advantage because these algorithms that are going to work, part of them are built on just general data, right? So if you're InsideSales.com, you can look at general trends on connect rates and area codes and all this type of stuff. But the stuff that's going to truly differentiate your performance as a team and as a company is the data that you've captured about your customers, because we all know that so much of what we do, we're special snowflakes, right? The markets that we sell into, our specific customers, our products, our sales cycles. And so companies that start tracking their data will be at a competitive advantage. And so the question becomes, which data is worth capturing and tracking? Our perspective at Chorus is that these conversations are probably the most valuable data set that people are ignoring today. And it's not just because, when your top rep decides to leave and take another job, they're taking 5 years of tribal knowledge with them. It's because there's so much insight about your prospects, about your customers, about their pain points, about your competitors, about product insights around, what people care about, that I think you just need to start capturing it. And so part of that, I think, is a function of sales ops, which is why I'm so excited to see sales ops getting so much more of the recognition that it deserves as a function that scalable teams can be built on top of. But also finding the right vendors that understand the data, understand the technology, and most importantly, know how to help you operationalize the technology and get it adopted so that you can actually get the benefits out of it. And that's a place where I think there's a very, very wide spectrum on vendors today. Assume that they all have great technology. Some do a fantastic job helping you operationalize it, roll it out, and capturing the ROI. And others, I think, are, they've nailed the technology part of it. They haven't yet nailed the human part of it.
Sure. And I'd love to hear Steven's perspective on this, right? Because obviously you must have quite a few technologies that you're working with and some, a lot of data that you're probably playing with. What's actually helping you move the needle?
Yeah, it's a great question. And frankly, I think the point that Roy made about the need to operationalize the technology as being critical to the success of your organization is the one that really resonates most with me. We're using, a wide variety of tooling, and a lot of our success and a lot of the adoption of that tooling is something that is directly correlated to the level of investment that those vendors made in ensuring we came on board and were successful in actually using that technology. I was, as a former special operations person myself, I was reading Thomas Greer, the guy who wrote under the pen name of Dalton Fury's book, Kill Bin Laden. And essentially when quote unquote Delta Force went into the mountains to hunt bin Laden in the early parts of the war in Afghanistan, and forgive the tangent here, the reason the Delta Force commandos at the time had a competitive advantage was part and parcel due to the fact that they had a superior technological advantage. They had night vision goggles, they had B-52 bombers on call, and they had the kinds of communication equipment that ensured that they could safely and securely and effectively communicate with each other. But they were tasked with a partner indigenous force. And that indigenous force was unwilling to fight at night because they couldn't see at night. So the commando said, hey, we have night vision. Take a look through this night vision and look, like, you can see everything. And they were enamored by it, but because they had never been trained or enabled or part of a culture that insisted that they work in every sort of adverse environment and prepared them for that, they were still unwilling to fight at night, and therefore every time they were gaining ground during the day, they would simply retreat at night and give it up. And I say that because what I've found is the more technology we bring aboard as a sales organization, the more there becomes a burden on sales leaders to continue to ensure that people both use it effectively, and are gaining the value that you assumed you would gain from that investment when you brought it on board. So I think you can augment a sales organization with technology, but you can't replace a culture of continuous learning and training and enablement. And success can be part of that culture, but what's interesting to me is tooling that actually makes one better able to not just succeed in a sales cycle, but also to coach people and to continue to learn and to grow so that we can succeed not just in our current sales swing today, but in the upstream aspirational sale we're looking to drive tomorrow.
I do have a question. It might be kind of a good opportunity to maybe dive into this one, but someone asked a question actually about Chorus. So Roy, I think the question boils down to what exactly it is that you're providing in terms of this realm of predictive sales. Specifically, like the question goes, are you recording sales conversations, transcribing, aggregating, evaluating the input, like a sales-centric listening tool? So, I mean, what would your response be to that?
Yes, thank you for the question. So that's pretty accurate. Think of Chorus as an assistant almost for a rep that helps them be aware of the important things that happen in their conversations, and does all the heavy lifting to find those important moments for you. So Chorus joins every conversation for the rep, it transcribes it, and then it automatically highlights and surfaces every important moment in the conversation as it relates to your sales cycle. So an example might be, as a manager, you might want to know, my team did 50 calls this week. I just want to know, who are those calls to? What was the agenda? What were the concrete next steps that came out of it? And what topics were discussed, right? Were there any big objections that came up? Were there any competitors that came up? And so Chorus will go through the transcript of the conversation and automatically surface for you, these were the 3 action items that came up, and yes, there was actually a conversation around scheduling that next event. And so without even having to spend a minute looking at a call, you could get that insight. For the sales rep, it's helpful because they don't need to focus on note-taking. They can assume that they can go back to a transcribed call with all those key moments highlighted. It might be, where did we talk about their implementation timeline? Where did we talk about the decision-making process? Where did we talk about their budget? All these things that we know are a part of effective sales conversations. Chorus will tell you when they happened, if they happened, and equally importantly, it can tell you like, hey, we had a discovery call, like Stephen was talking about earlier, and it turns out that we never talked about timeline, or we never talked about what the goals and priorities of that organization is for Q1 2017. And so that becomes a very leveraged way for a manager to get an X-ray on the capabilities of folks on their team and figure out where they can help an individual rep or a deal move forward. And then what gets exciting, of course, is when you roll that up across all the conversations that you've had across a quarter, and you can go back and look at your wins and your losses and see what it is that your very most effective people are doing differently and learn from that.
I almost look at it as, we've been able to capture some of these informations around conversations in the past. So you've always had things like call recording. But it's really taking that to the next level and saying, okay, well, can we be really intelligent and learn something from these conversations in an aggregate that is actionable? And we kind of have this today on the email side. Right, Stephen, what do you use, for example, for email?
We use SalesLoft.
Right. So in SalesLoft, you can set up these, I guess what they're calling cadences. And you can see kind of the responses over time and do A/B tests and kind of measure, what type of email copy works better than the other. But as we all know, you don't really sell a whole lot of software or a whole lot of anything just via email conversations. So, and that's where you really need to get to a call or face-to-face, whatever your sales process dictates. Which I guess gets to the next question here we have from the audience, which is, collecting the right data. Right? So it's great if we can collect all the data. Right? I can almost look at that meme with that stick figure with the fist standing up and saying, like, collect all the data. But what should all we actually be collect all the data? But what actually should we be collecting? And obviously, there's going to be different situations in different types of companies and whatnot. But what would you say, particularly Stephen, I guess this question is more for you, is like, what would be the 5 most important metrics to collect from a data standpoint that would help in, whether it's qualification, just information you need to know if you're going to actually have a successful sales engagement with a prospect?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. I love it. I go harken back to the Sandler success triangle, where success in any sales cycle at the rep level is sort of contingent on your belief in your ability to succeed, doing the right behaviors that drive success, and executing those behaviors using the correct techniques. And what's interesting now is sales orgs are generally pretty good at capturing whether or not we're doing the right behaviors. Are people picking up the phones? Are they sending email? Are they going face-to-face with a customer? That they are capturing the activities. But I think what's really, really difficult to measure is, are they using the right techniques in those engagements? So capturing, whether or not they're setting an upfront contract, whether or not they're setting next steps, it's hard if you're not measuring adherence to even basic fundamentals like that, or asking the right kinds of qualification questions to surface the right kinds of pain to compel a prospect to want to move down, go and sort of get involved in a sales process. That is really hard to currently capture. And those measurements of using the right techniques are what dictates whether or not something is a high quality engagement. So I think I'm not worried about the top 5 activity metrics that we're currently capturing. What's more interesting to me is what are the top 5 techniques that we should measure the success of in any given engagement.
Yeah, and Mark, if I can add to that from maybe a vendor perspective, I would say there are 2 points that I want to make that tie into this. The first one is that a lot of people think of as technology as the answer. And I think that what technology is going to do is take a lot of things that used to be differentiators for organizations and just level the playing field, right? Oh, you used to have a great process for teaching your reps to schedule next steps. Well, now you're going to have a piece of technology that'll do that for them. And what it does is it pushes more and more of the differentiation on a team's performance to the decisions that leadership makes around what do we invest in, what do we measure, and the culture of the team. All of these other things that simply flipping a switch with technology can't solve. How that ties back to metrics and data is pretty simple. My perspective on this is that some data and some process is better than nothing. Because what you can do with the predictive technology is pretty simple. You can start measuring you might define 5 stages, and they might not be perfect, but they're better than what you have today. And then you go look at them and you see whether or not those stages are helping you properly forecast. And if they're not, you dig in and you start to understand, okay, what are we missing? What should we change next quarter? What do we want to add to this? What do we want to subtract from this? And so it's not you start collecting this data and you're done. It's a process. And so part of what we do, with our customers is we start just tracking really basic things like, hey, if we consistently talk about timeline during a discovery process, does that help us better forecast? And if the answer is yes, then perfect. Let's roll that out to everybody. Let's make it a part of our process. If it turns out that there are a bunch of deals that completely blindsided us and they didn't close, what was the reason for that? Oh, it turned out that this key piece of information came up really far down the pipeline. How do we introduce that as a question earlier on to make sure that we're not blindsided by it in the future? And so, to answer that question, what I would say is, start collecting, be thoughtful, define a process, define the data that you think matters for your sales cycle, capture it as best you can, hopefully in a way that doesn't put a big burden on the reps, and use technology, like Chorus or like something else, if the technology can do some of that data capture for you, and then review it. Make it a part of your culture and your team so that you continually get better.
Yeah, and what I'd add is when you iterate on that process, if you are capturing the right data, you can start building in verifiers that actually verify that you are accurately predicting something or how deep or how far along a sales process a opportunity might be. And you can map those verifiers actually into that sales process. So it's really interesting to take the framework that Roy's talking about, which is, create sort of a minimum viable product version of your sales process, and then use data to iterate and refine it, and do it in a way where the outcomes that you're verifying and measuring are predictive of success.
Yeah, and I think just to sum up what were some really, really awesome points, you don't have to get very complex with this. I mean, obviously we're talking about predictive sales and predictive technologies to be more predictive, to have better results. But it starts with the simple things, right? And I've worked with a number of different sales leaders, and one of the approaches that has been, I would deem pretty successful across the board, is just having a checklist at each of your stages of your sales process, however you've defined it. And at each of those stages, you tell the team, these are the set number of things, 2, 3, whatever number of things you need to know in order to advance that deal forward. And just by having that rigor of doing that and making sure you can capture those minimal data points, then you have a data set that you can actually start to actually do some analysis in and leverage some predictive technologies to get a lot smarter. But it's about having that, really to your point, Stephen, having that culture that is doing that has adopted, a process, a type of thoughtfulness to the sale, and also looking at, a constant ability to be efficient and to learn from your mistakes and get better. That's what really is going to be more impactful downstream.
Yeah, Mark, and if I can add to that, just the way that we're building that into Chorus is through real-time checklists. And so for so many reps, it's not that we don't know what we need to be doing. It's that sometimes you can just forget because you're in the moment, you're taking most of your calls alone, you're rushing from place to place. And so part of what we're doing is making it easy for reps to see that checklist of what should I be covering in a great discovery call. And imagine that, as you hit on those different topics, the technology automatically checks the box for you and gives you that feedback loop. And so what that does is take the manager out of this realm of being, bad cop saying, please adhere to the methodology, and create that feedback loop directly with the rep. And in doing that, you'll capture that data in a way that also isn't a burden on the rep. You'll be able to learn from it, and you'll be able to, continue to evolve that checklist as you learn what works and what's important for your sales cycle.
Yeah, and maybe have less contentious one-on-ones with your reps I'm sure, Stephen, you've had your fair share of those kind of rough conversations. We did get a question from the audience that it's a very tactical question, but there's a good point here, which is legality, right? Mm-hmm. We're talking about collecting a lot of data. There's obviously sensitivities, and that also has jurisdictional elements to it as well. But specifically to Chorus, because you are recording the call, what is incumbent upon you in terms of disclosure?
Yeah.
Do you have to actually tell a customer that they're being recorded?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the simple answer is you do, and the more important part of that answer is that nobody cares. The legal team might care, but that's something that you can get over pretty quickly by persuading them that you're working with a vendor that knows exactly what they're doing when it comes to securing the data. And so what our customers do, most of them, is simply in the meeting invite, and again, we're focused on quota-carrying account executives. In those meeting invites, when you write down the agenda, have a little note at the bottom that says something like, hey, we're growing our team like crazy, and record our calls for coaching and training purposes. And customers will read that. It's almost something that they expect when they're dealing with organizations of a certain size, because we've all experienced it as consumers when we call our banks or our insurance companies or airlines or really anybody. And so I think, the biggest thing is just realizing that there's value to having the recording in a way that didn't exist a few years ago because of technology like ours, and making sure that reps understand that, this is what we do when we send a meeting invite now.
Yeah. I also had another question pop up here, which is about real-time coaching. This is an interesting question. Sort of a bio. I'm just going to read it. A biofeedback feature enabling or reminding reps to improve his or her approach on the fly. If that's accurate, what is the nature of the feedback loop? The mention of electric shock. I'm not sure how that would go over in terms of the Glassdoor reviews of reps running for the doors after being shocked by numerous corrections. But what does real-time coaching really look like?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll tell you what. We solved the technology part of this over a year and a half ago. And Mark, I think when we grabbed coffee the last time you were in San Francisco, I showed that to you. The way to bring it up to a rep during a conversation in a way that doesn't distract them and truly helps them be more aware of what they're doing is the thing that we focus the most on. So I'm really excited about releasing that in early 2017. But it starts with something really simple, which is just having a little window where you take your notes on the screen, beside your WebEx or your GoToMeeting or your Zoom, that says, hey, Roy, this conversation's been going on for 30 minutes. It's a discovery, and your prospect has spoken for a grand total of 5 minutes. That awareness already moves the needle for our customers and our users. And it's small, right? The second thing is where we're going, and where we're going is real-time feedback around things like, we know from the meeting invite that this webinar is going to end in 5 minutes, and hey, Roy, you actually haven't started talking about next steps yet, right? So helping sales reps move to next steps 10 minutes before the end of the scheduled time truly does move the needle in terms of, their ability to move a deal forward. And plan those that next concrete event. And then over time, it'll even be things like, hey, this competitor was mentioned. What are the 2 or 3 bullet points from our playbook that we're using now to respond to that objection about a competitor? And so there's a lot of things that you can do. And we're starting with the simple low-hanging fruit, and we're starting from things that reps themselves are asking us for.
Okay. So I guess, if there's other questions out there in the audience, please do feel free to ask. I think we've done a pretty good job of collecting some of the questions during the course of this webinar. But to your point, Roy, maybe we should wrap up this package. And what are our next steps? What should people be thinking about in terms of this journey of predictive sales? And again, Stephen, please add your thoughts as well, because from your perspective, you're on the other side looking at these potential technologies downstream. So maybe you can share from your perspective what are the things that are really exciting for you potentially.
Yeah, and I'll start by saying I think there's a lot of exciting technology out there. Chorus is certainly exciting, but I think it is critical that sales leaders remember to invest in technology that does not only make reps successful, but also helps to build the kind of culture of success, continuous learning, of growth and enablement that will lead to even more success in the future. I look at working in Ranger Regiment. We were one of the best equipped units in the entire military. But we weren't the Army's premier special operations direct action raid force because we had the best technology. We had the most rigorous training and enablement program set up, and we adhered to an incredibly high standard. So any technology that can augment helping you to create what we at MuleSoft term is we define our culture as a team of winners that's not just driven to win, but really by virtue of that success, really inspires those around them to win. If you can build that and use technology to help create that kind of culture, those are the kinds of investments that I'm of the mind you should be making.
Awesome. Well, I'll add to that. My takeaways are on the slide here. The one that I'd focus on more than anything is, I hate just parroting Stephen back, but this idea that as predictive technology becomes more prevalent, what truly will differentiate teams is the leadership and the way that you as leaders prioritize what to invest in, where to put your energy, where to put your time. And I'll give you a simple example that came through the sales process that we went through with one of our large customers, where the priority was to install a workflow product for the SDRs. And when we challenged them to think about, look, where are you going to get the most bang for your buck over the next 3 or 4 quarters? Is it improving the efficiency of the SDR team by 20 or 30%? Or is it reducing the ramp time of every single new rep that you're going to be hiring over 2017? And reducing the churn rate because certain reps don't ramp, don't hit their numbers, and then end up getting pushed out. And, there are going to be, since we launched a few weeks ago formally, I'm starting to appreciate just how many unsolicited inbound requests sales leaders get from vendors. And so vendors are going to be pushing for their solutions, whether or not that is the leverage point for your organization, whether or not that's your bottleneck to outperforming your competition. And so, looking at making sure that you have the data that helps you understand what is our bottleneck as a company. I was talking to Joe Caprio a little while ago, who's the VP of Sales at Insight Squared, and we were just talking about the fact that he can look at his team and realize that he has a problem in the conversion rate from stage 3 to stage 4. That is the problem for their team. That is the single place where if they invest their time and energy, they will move the needle for their organization. And so, I think as much as I hate to say it, the more that technology matters, the more the technology doesn't matter. And it's about understanding your team, understanding your org, understanding the core metrics, and then working with the vendors that will help you move the needle on your real bottlenecks. And so, in our case, we like to think that we are one of the very few pieces of technology that will move the needle on ramp times and effectiveness by creating this feedback loop with reps on the conversations that they're having. But I can certainly tell you that the default for many organizations is to just think, we need to roll out this next piece of technology. We need to roll out this next piece of technology. And it's because it's easier to roll out an implementation of something like Outreach or SalesLoft than it is to take a hard look at, your enablement program for ramping new reps and the way that you make them successful and the way that you week in and week out train your frontline managers to have effective coaching conversations and so on and so forth.
Well, that's amen to that, right? Let's get our acts together and actually think about what do we want to do from a thoughtful process perspective, have that culture of learning, and that will actually allow us to use predictive technology to augment what we do and become better practitioners of the field, which, ironically, our last question of the day is all about technology. But do you mind answering the last question? And we do have a couple of minutes, so if anyone has any additional questions for Roy or Stephen, please do ask now. But we had a question pop up about what Chorus integrates with. So I imagine Chorus doesn't live in its own universe. You probably connect with some things already, or you have some plans to connect with different types of technologies, sales technology stacks downstream. Yeah,
so absolutely. So we aspire to be the place where your asset, your conversations all live in a single place, regardless of where you place them. So for SDR teams, if you are recording calls through InsideSales.com or SalesLoft or Outreach or ToutApp or anything like that, we can pull in those recordings and analyze them for you. Our focus as a company is on the quota-carrying account executives and helping them have higher quality conversations and helping organizations learn from the insights that are in those. So from that perspective, we have native integrations with WebEx, with GoToMeeting, with Zoom, with Join.me, with Uber Conference, with ClearSlide, and we're adding more as our customers ask for them. But think of it as really simple. You kick off your ClearSlide just like you would normally, and a little window pops up to the rep that says, would you like Chorus to join this conversation? If so, tell us which opportunity or account it's with. The rep enters that in, hits a button, and then Chorus joins it, captures the conversation, and we do the rest. So you can actually be up and running in 30 minutes. It's an extremely light lift. Hopefully that answers your question.
I think it does, hopefully. But if people do have additional questions, where can they find you, Roy, and you, Stephen? What's the best way to contact you?
Sure. So for me, Roy, it would be LinkedIn. So feel free to add me, Roy Ranani, RAANANI, or send me an email at roy@chorus.ai. I'd love to hear from you, even if it's feedback on the product, your general thoughts. We continue learning, and our target customers are technology companies, financial services companies, with 25, 50, 100, 200, 300 quota-carrying reps. And, of course, we love working with data-driven companies that have high expectations for their teams, large aspirations in terms of growth, and where they're going to hold us accountable to helping them drive real results, because that's all we care about.
Awesome. And you can find me on LinkedIn as well. My name is spelled Stephen with a V, and my last name is Brody, Bravo, Romeo, Oscar, Uniform, Delta, Yankee. There's a U in there. You can blame Ellis Island for that. Also, at Stephen Brody on Twitter. And I am hiring top performers, so if you're interested in breaking into tech or breaking into tech sales, I have open roles in both Atlanta and San Francisco. Always open to speaking with any A players who are driven to win and really inspire those around them to win. So if you're a gritty, excellent performer with a track record of excellence to validate that, shoot me a line. I'd love to talk to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can attest MuleSoft is doing some really amazing things out there, and it was a great company to join. Chorus AI, obviously, I think on the cutting edge of these types of predictive technologies, and it's going to be a huge, huge player in the space as we look into 2017. If you want to learn more about the Enterprise Sales Meetup, you can go to enterprisesalesmeetup.com. You can find me, Mark Birch, on LinkedIn. That's BIRCH. Or you can shoot me an email at mark, M-A-R-K, @entsales.com. That's entsales.com. And thank you for listening. We should be doing some more webinars downstream. And thank you again for your time. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Roy. This has been fun. Check you later.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
The performance of sales folks when they're doing what they do best, which is connecting and persuading prospects on the phone.
Awesome.
Excellent.
And this is Stephen Brody. I appreciate the kind introduction. I'm certainly not an incredible speaker, especially after staying up really late to watch the end of Game 7. But just to give a little background, MuleSoft is a company based in San Francisco. We are helping companies really connect anything to everything with the goal of helping them really create an application network. Prior to working at MuleSoft, I worked at a predictive analytics HR startup, and prior to working there, I actually spent 6 years in Army Special Operations working in 2nd Ranger Battalion. So if I have let loose a swear word or two, please, it's a hard habit to unlearn after spending that much time in the military, so I apologize ahead of time.
That's no worries, Stephen. And again, really glad to have you. Yeah, and if you get a little bit out of line, we'll have to go all military on you. But I like to call this the PG1.
But nothing in here is set in stone. And so part of this is, I'm sure that many folks listening to this webinar are involved in actually shaping the future through the products and technologies that they're building. And so, we will be surprised by what we think is going to happen over the next 1 to 5 years, and what actually does play out. So we'd love to get other opinions shared over social media, and hopefully we won't insult too many people if we take a different point of view on some things. But so to answer your question, what is predictive sales? At a high level, I think of it as using historical data to help make better decisions or surface insights using technology. And the most important thing to think about is the context. So in what situations does past performance actually stand as a good indicator of future performance? And so, on this slide, I love using Michael Jordan as an example, because if you think about his career in basketball, the same rules applied, and you could be pretty sure, have a pretty good sense of what Michael's performance would be.
G13 webcast. So no worries on the language here. I think we're all pretty much adults, and being in sales, I've been known to drop a few F-bombs here or there. But I guess to lead things off, we probably want to just level set, right? Because predictive sales there's a lot of marketing speak. And since this is not a marketing audience, we really want to talk to what does it really mean from a sales perspective? So Roy, I'd be happy to just have you launch in. If you have some slides that you want to share throughout our talk, please do.
Sure thing. So I'm going to start, if I may, with a little bit of context. And so predictive sales, this is a field that's evolving in front of us. And so we want to touch on a lot of different parts of it. Ironically, this will not be data-driven, as data-driven as predictive sales is, because we want to share a lot of different points of view out there on what this means to organizations and how they operationalize it. I also wanted to add that it's a complex landscape, and so we'll take a point of view because Mark suggested that having a point of view on it is better than not taking.
Hello, everyone who is joining us this afternoon, morning, or evening, wherever you may be in the globe. You've reached the Enterprise Sales Forum webinar series. And this is a series that we use to bolster what we do generally, which is bring B2B sales professionals together on a monthly basis to meet each other, share ideas, to network, and to learn from some really great practitioners out there in the field of sales so that we can all become a lot more nuanced and a lot more skilled in this thing that we call sales, and particularly in B2B sales. And today we are really delighted to have two incredible speakers to join us, and again, to bolster what we do live, but also to bring some great folks together so we can have chats online and through webinars such as this. And today we want to talk about this idea of predictive sales. What really does it mean? What does it mean to actually implement and embrace this idea of predictive sales in your organization? Are we just talking about technology? Are we talking about process? Are we talking about really an entire way of thinking about your sales organization? And we brought together Roy, CEO of Chorus.ai, and we have Stephen Brody, who is the head of account development Americas at MuleSoft. And I'm going to let Roy lead us off in this discussion, but maybe just like a quick round of introductions to share where you're from, how you got to this point, and then we can jump right into the meat of the matter.
Sure thing. Thanks so much, Mark. So I started Chorus. I've been working on Chorus for about 2 years. We are based in San Francisco with R&D in Tel Aviv, and we're part of this trend of predictive sales, and we apply predictive sales to conversations. And if you think about the last unknown frontier in organizations and in sales, it's what's happening in those 10,000 hours of conversations a quarter that a typical 50-person sales team has. And so we're really focused on using technology to help augment and improve